Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 16th, 2026. In today's discussion, we're going to take a look at what is happening in the tropics from the Eastern Pacific, obviously, also to the Atlantic, too, where we have our two areas of interest that we are watching, especially though. We are watching the Gulf, which still seems to have a chance at development as we get towards the weekend. The model still shows some development depending on what model you look at, and it looks and seems as if the ensembles slightly uptrended once again today in potential chances for development. And of course, the National Hurricane Center still has an area highlighted for that region. So we're going to go over all of it. We're going to go over what the National Hurricane Center says, and of course, all of the models for today. So make sure to stay tuned for all of that, and let's get started. First off, with the National Hurricane Center homepage and the latest 2 p.m. tropical weather bulletin from the National Hurricane Center. We have our two areas here. First off, in the Eastern Atlantic, where we only have a 10% chance of development, came from a aggressive-looking wave which came off the coast of Africa a few days ago. And I mentioned yesterday how the models were actually surprisingly aggressive in showing this, at least trying to briefly spin up, but obviously this was always limited by the environment, which again in the tropics and especially in the MDR here this year is just not that favorable. So this is not going to develop, and again, this only has a 10% chance. It probably will be reduced to a 0% chance within the next outlook or two. Would not be shocked. But obviously, though, we have another area here off the southeast coast and in the Gulf. And this is the area that we've been monitoring, I believe, since last week, since the models began to latch on to the potential that we would get some development here. And this is still only at a 20% chance of development right now, but the models still have something trying here. And regardless of what happens, there will be heavy rainfall for Florida and the southeast starting this weekend. And of course, we're going to go over that as well. Moving on to the Eastern Pacific, we have multiple areas to monitor here, including Tropical Storm Elida, which is 60 miles per hour right now and likely on its way to becoming a hurricane. It's still going to become a hurricane, although more than likely probably will not reach the upper end of its potential. Like I once said, I thought Elida had a shot at becoming a major hurricane, but it looks like it struggled a little bit with shear and things like that, so obviously its high potential or its max potential of intensity has kind of been choked off, but I'll show you the forecast here in a little bit. Elida is more than likely still on track to becoming a hurricane, and if so, probably the first hurricane of the season here in the Eastern Pacific. And then beyond that, we probably have a chance at another hurricane here with this area of interest here, 20% chance of development in the next 48 hours, and then in the next 7 days, 90%. And of course, I'll show you why I say this might be another hurricane as well with the models in just a little bit later on in the video. So, taking a look at the Eastern Pacific here, starting off there. First of all, you can see where Tropical Storm Elida is, and it's definitely a decent-looking tropical storm. It definitely has that, curved shrimp shape, like we always like to say. When a storm looks like it's shrimping out, it definitely looks like it is intensifying and doing decently. And Elida is definitely doing better than it was before when it was dealing with quite a bit of wind shear, and you can kind of see in these early frames convection kind of disheveled and definitely some dry air maybe hurting it before, but now it has a much more defined CDO with much more deeper convection. And in general, you could just tell by the satellite it has a better shape here. So Elida is probably intensifying once again, and again, more than likely going to become a hurricane here. And of course, according to the National Hurricane Center, they expect that. In fact, by tomorrow, they expect this to become a hurricane, probably lasting this up until the weekend, before it eventually will probably quickly die out soon after that, and expected to already be a remnant low by the time we get to Tuesday. So this only has a few days left in it, but probably more than enough time to become a hurricane. And more than likely, I believe that is what the outcome will be. And again, this will more than likely be the first hurricane of the season in the Eastern Pacific when it does so. Of course, if it does. But again, I mean, I'm pretty sure very likely that will happen. Moving on to the Atlantic now. Still not much happening in the Atlantic basin. We had that tropical wave here in the Eastern Atlantic, which with the earlier frames from yesterday, you could see definitely looked like an interesting system. And in fact, now that I realize it, very interesting that we had a, pretty much nearly day-long gap here in the satellite, at least with this GOES 19 satellite. Luckily, it was recently brought back online today, but you can kind of see the difference. Actually, it's actually cool in a way. You can see the difference from how it looked like yesterday to how it looks like today. And I mean, yeah, you could just see the environment out here in the deep tropics is definitely not permissible for development. We went from having a pretty interesting looking tropical wave here in the Eastern Atlantic, definitely had a decent amount of convection and maybe some sort of low level trough here that was developing, to now just completely fizzled out and choked off. And I mean, this is the trend that we're going to see quite a bit throughout the year this year, especially throughout the deep tropics, with sheer dry air. And probably the biggest case here for this wave is the dry air, and I'll show you that in a little bit here. We have a lot of Saharan air out there in the Eastern Atlantic right now, and of course a lot of that comes with climatology and the fact that it's early on in the season still. It's July. I mean, Saharan air peaks in July in the Atlantic typically, so but still not very permissible for development. And obviously we are seeing how that completely choked off this wave here in the past day, and because of that, not very likely to develop at all. And I believe, and to be quite honest with you, it probably never really had much of a shot. Throughout the rest of the Atlantic, though, again, things are still very quiet. It still looks very bone dry throughout the deep tropics and throughout the Caribbean as well. We had a flare of convection yesterday in the Yucatan and the Western Caribbean, but that has since died off as well. And then we have some shower and thunderstorm activity here in the Southwest Atlantic. And obviously we have some energy associated with the leftover front here that was situated across the Gulf and stretching into the Atlantic, and that is beginning to break down. And obviously from that, we're going to have to watch and see whether or not we're able to get development from the leftover energy here, which you can kind of see little bits and pieces of it over the southeast right now, producing convection. And of course, regardless of development, as I said before, we're going to have rainfall throughout the southeast and especially Florida here. But of course, it's going to be part of the pattern that we're going to have to watch here as we get towards the weekend for potential development in the Gulf. Moving on to the waves, the tropical waves right now, taking a look at how many of them we have out there. And it seems like we have 2 tropical waves in the Eastern Atlantic right now. Obviously, we have that one aggressive one, which actually has a low pressure associated with it, but obviously, well, again, will not really do much, but interesting that it was aggressive enough that it has its own low pressure. And then looks like we have another wave which was ahead of it, but looking at the satellite here, you can barely see it, and that really just goes to show just how unfavorable the environment is sometimes, that all of the moisture gets choked off from these tropical waves. And very oftentimes, when that happens, we end up with dry waves where there is a tropical wave, but there's almost no convection or moisture associated with it at all. So I guess that's probably what this tropical wave here to the west of this wave that's in the far eastern Atlantic is. And again, not surprising given the conditions that we have out there right now, especially given, again, the kind of year that we are seeing right now set up. And of course, with the dry air, we definitely have lots of it, no denying that, especially here in the Eastern Atlantic. Very, very thick values of Saharan air moving off the coast of Africa, probably a fresh plume moving off, and again, pretty much throughout the entire deep tropics, just completely plagued with Saharan air right now, and dry air in general, just keeping a lid on things, choking off the atmosphere from being able to produce moisture. And that's the pattern that we are seeing so far. And obviously that's also especially what's probably inhibiting development here in the Eastern Atlantic, since we have such strong Saharan air values here moving off the coast and into the Eastern Atlantic right now. So no wonder why this tropical wave here has completely choked and probably, again, will not develop. And then further west, we have less Saharan air, and notice where we have almost no dry air or Saharan air right now, and that is here in the Western Atlantic near the southeast coast and in the Gulf. And of course, those are the areas that we will be monitoring closely here over the next few days for any area that does have a chance at development. Looking at the wind shear too, definitely have a lot of wind shear across the Atlantic right now, especially most notably here in the Caribbean. Seems like we have very solid values throughout the Caribbean of anywhere from 30 to 40, probably shadings maxing out right now at 50 knots in the Caribbean. Lower wind shear throughout the central and eastern tropical Atlantic right now. So I guess wind shear is not yet a huge problem in the central to eastern MDR, but of course, to counteract that, we have the dry air. So, if it's not one unfavorable factor, it's another, and that's pretty much going to be the story again very often throughout this hurricane season. And then in the Western Atlantic here, definitely some shear present right now, but starting to see some low pockets of shear develop in the Gulf. And as you can tell by these blue dots here, this actually represents the shear tendency. And I brought this map up specifically for this exact reason, to show the shear tendency, as in these lines here representing where shear is increasing or decreasing. And over the past 24 hours here, from the blue dots here, we've actually had some decreasing wind shear in the Gulf and in the southwestern Atlantic. This area, this general region here, where we are watching over the next few days for development potentially in the Atlantic. So it's interesting that we are starting to see wind shear lower in those areas. All right, moving on to the models now to see what they show today. And you can see, starting off with the European ensembles, quite a decent signal here in the Gulf. Not a lot of ensembles showing activity, but interestingly enough, the ensembles that do show activity actually show some pretty strong storms developing. Now, obviously, not sure we're going to get that. Not sure we're going to get a what is this, Category 1, Category 2 storm that some of these ensembles are showing, and I see some of the pressures on these ensembles are very low, so more than likely the European won't be right in that aspect, but that is a signal nonetheless. And then, of course, we have our Eastern Atlantic signal as well, which the European ensembles show. And they're obviously less aggressive today on development than yesterday, given, environmental conditions are not as favorable. But what I do find interesting is that there are a handful of ensembles here that seemingly trace back to the wave here in the Eastern Atlantic that try to maybe respark something here in the Southwest Atlantic, and that seems to happen probably around 8 to 10 days out, maybe, or in the 7 to 10 day time frame. So if there's another area that we need to watch for potential development within the next week or so here, maybe there might be some sort of energy that tries to respark from whatever wave is out here in the Eastern Atlantic, in the Western Atlantic, and that seems pretty prevalent on the European ensembles, as well as in general a decent amount of activity here just off the East Coast here in the western half of the basin. And I bring that up because it's not just the European ensembles doing it. Here's the European AI, and in fact multiple ensembles are doing it. I had the European, this is the European AI. First of all, pretty decent signal here in the Gulf. Definitely probably an uptrend compared to yesterday, and almost all of the ensemble members now with this Gulf thing actually keep the piece of energy in the Gulf, so more than likely we're probably going to have to mainly focus our attention in terms of development chances in the Gulf rather than worrying about whether or not something is going to slide into the southeast here, which is, I guess, the scenario that the National Hurricane Center was monitoring. But looks like the main chance of development will be in the Gulf. But then as well, roughly around 7 to 10 days out too, the European ensembles show something here trying to spark up in the Western Atlantic off the East Coast. So that's two models showing some activity here to watch as well. Can we make it three? I guess so, because this is the FVN3 ensembles, the Google AI ensembles. They seem to show development in the Gulf as well, with a few ensembles, kind of like the Euro, where not a lot of ensembles are shown to, have development chances, but the ensembles that do show development actually show some pretty strong stuff and some pretty interesting outcomes. Obviously, those that are not likely to happen, but that's still a signal nonetheless here in the Gulf. And then we have another interesting signal here in the southwestern Atlantic. So it's the trends, and you have to pay attention to the ideas here, the ideas that are being thrown around by the models, and you kind of have to compare and contrast them, and you'll see that a reoccurring idea here, of course, obviously the biggest one, and probably the one that matters more to us right now, is potentially something here in the Gulf within the next few days. Again, we're monitoring that for this weekend, but also maybe something here that tries to spark up in the Western Atlantic, maybe 7 to 10 days out from now, and that seems to happen here on the European AI ensembles, and then on the Google AI ensembles as well. So 3 major ensemble plots, all of them, of course, reliable, showing something. So looks like we will have something to watch here in the Atlantic, at least over the next week or so. And of course, obviously here, with whatever does try to develop in the Gulf, which, taking a look at the GFS, moving away from the ensembles now and going towards the operational models. Let's see what the GFS shows for the 12Z run today. And interestingly enough, the GFS is also showing development or some sort of piece of energy here that tries to make its way out over the northern Gulf, roughly 2 or 3 days from now. So again, for this weekend. And this is interesting to me because the GFS has absolutely been the absolute least aggressive model in showing any sort of development here in the Gulf. In fact, for most of the model runs over the last few days, the GFS has shown absolutely nothing, not even a piece of energy here that sparks up at all whatsoever. But now today, definitely some sort of piece of energy here that the model is picking up on, although it still probably doesn't fully develop. But I mean, it kind of tries to a little bit, maybe a little influence from, brown ocean effect or whatnot. Bottom line is that the GFS definitely has more of a signal today of a piece of energy here over the southeastern and the northeastern Gulf than the last few days. So maybe the GFS is starting to latch on to the idea that we might get development as well in the Gulf this weekend. So that is definitely an interesting sign. But what about the European AI, the model that I guess started this whole thing with development chances? And it looks like they still try to do something here in the Gulf, starting roughly around Saturday, when we start to see the piece of energy here move out over the water, and then it keeps it out through Sunday and then into Monday, and then definitely some development that tries here. So the models are definitely showing something here in the Gulf, and definitely something that we will still have to watch over the next few days. The chance of development is still not zero, and the models today kind of reinforce that. Obviously, the chances are still not very high right now. Still a lot of uncertainty to be, ironed out, and there's obviously, a disagreement in the models. The European AI definitely probably trying to develop this a little bit more than the GFS, in which the GFS kind of has this over the southeast here and kind of, not really moving out over water much, but the models still seem to show some sort of signal here in the Gulf for development. So, of course, with that being said, we will be keeping an eye out on the tropics here very closely over the next few days. But before I forget, something else that I do want to bring up here, the precipitation over the southeast. And notice, over the next week alone, definitely a decent amount of precipitation here, especially over central and northern Florida, stretching up the East Coast, and obviously, depending on the track of whatever low pressure that develops, will affect who gets rain and where the highest rain totals will be. But regardless, I just want to point this out to those that if we don't get development, thinking that we won't have to worry about anything. No, we're still going to have to worry about potential rainfall here over the southeast over the next few days, and I bring that up on the heels of major flooding that happened in Texas over the last few days, and very likely took quite a number of lives, which is why I always talk about the flooding and I always talk about the rainfall, and I never underestimate rainfall, even if we don't get it from a tropical system, because we had rainfall here, quite significant rainfall in Texas for the last few days, and of course, obviously none of that came from any tropical cyclones, right? I mean, we're not talking about any tropical systems active right now, so did not come from a tropical cyclone, but we still had devastating flooding in Texas. So I do not want to underestimate the rainfall potential, and we're definitely going to have quite a decent bit of it here in the southeast regardless over the next few days. So keep in mind in terms of thinking about that as well. Moving on to the Eastern Pacific, and I'm going to speed things up a little bit here because I want to wrap it up. I don't want to, drag this discussion out too long. But I mean, if you like these very long discussions, do let me know. I'm pretty sure a lot of you do. But anyways, let's keep it moving here. GFS in the Eastern Pacific, taking a look at how things are going to fare out there. Elida here, obviously, will probably continue to strengthen. Probably going to become a hurricane. It's kind of nearing hurricane strength right now, and it still has roughly at least 1 or 2 days to do so, so I'm pretty sure it's going to become a hurricane, and the GFS obviously still shows strengthening. And then eventually, of course, it'll move on off to the northeast, or northwest, I should say, and then probably once again, as we get towards the early part of next week, it'll fizzle out and die, and then not be of any concern for anybody, except maybe its remnants here might move on off to the north, and maybe we'll end up with, maybe California will end up with some remnant moisture from whatever is left of Elida here in a few days. And then beyond that, as you can see here, already starting by the time we get to Saturday and Sunday, yet another area develops here, and that's our other area of interest that the National Hurricane Center has right now. And the GFS, by the time we get to early next week, already makes that a pretty intense storm. See how strong it shows it. 962 millibars, or actually initially deepens it in the 950s. So maybe second time's a charm. We might get a major hurricane out of this system, or in the very least a second hurricane behind. At least if Elida becomes a hurricane, maybe. And then you could already see here by the time we get to 7 days out, yet another area begins to develop here in the Eastern Pacific. So lots of activity coming, and to top it all off, here are the ensembles from the European for the next 2 weeks, and yeah, I think this pretty much tells you all you need to know. We have one with the Elida right now, and then another one that develops, and then another one after that, and all of them have pretty decent ensembles showing some pretty strong solutions here. So I'd imagine we are probably going to have a chance for at least a hurricane or two, maybe even 3 over the next few days and weeks in the Pacific. And I'd assume at least one of them are going to at least try to become a major hurricane, right? And regardless, this is, again, more than likely just the beginning of what will be a very active stretch here in the Pacific, as I warned you all about. And taking a look at the MJO2 to top it all off, the atmospheric favorability, and look at where the MJO is from now till literally the end of the month. It's in phase 7 and 8, so pretty much going to be parked in the Pacific here for the next few weeks. So that's going to help keep things cranking here in the Pacific, and the Eastern Pacific hurricane season definitely is going to take off, and we are probably going to get a number of storms, probably a number of strong storms as well, and the Eastern Pacific is just going to go all out. And I've said I said it was going to happen before, and now it looks like it's really coming together now, and we are going to see the fruits of it. In fact, we are already seeing it with Elida and what is about to come here in the next few days. So we will obviously be keeping a very close eye out on the tropics and the Pacific, but luckily, I should say though, nothing is really expected to impact any land yet. Yet right now, for at least the next week, no land areas are under threat. Obviously, we would want it to stay that way, but obviously you don't know. So of course, we will be keeping an eye out on the tropics very closely. With that being said, I'm going to wrap up today's discussion. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you want more videos like this. And click the notification bell if you do decide to subscribe, which I hope you do so, to get videos the moment I upload them, literally down to the second. So if you want that, make sure to subscribe and turn the notification bell as well. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. I'll be back with more tomorrow.